Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Learning C# with CodeTech, and today we are going to be learning about methods. We're actually going to be carrying on from the last place we stopped in the last video, and in the last video we talked about variables. So if you haven't seen that video, I would link that video on top of this video, so you can just click on that and go check out that video if you're a bit confused on what we're talking about in this video. Anyways, let's get right into the video. Okay, before we get into some actual fun stuff with the programming, let me just explain what a method is. A method is just a set of procedure that allows our code to accomplish or approach something. So say for example, you in real life you were given a maths problem 2 plus 2 and you were asked to solve it. You would solve this by using a method. You would need a method to solve this problem, right? And the method you'd want to use is adding 2 and 2 together to give you 4. Now this 2 plus 2 is called a method, except in programming we can take this whole procedure, this whole step, and put it in a method. You can think of it as a box. You can put this whole step inside of a box, and every time you call that box, this whole step gets run, and then you get 4 every time. This is really useful in programming because it makes the code reusable, and in programming your goal is to make your code as reusable as possible, because then you save time and memory. So let's actually get right into it, because we're actually going to be doing some coding this lesson. We'll actually be running some of our code to see some results. Let's get right into it. Now we're going to be following the DNA principle. For those of you that don't know what the DNA principle is, you can watch my previous video on variables. I actually kind of went into more depth about what the DNA principle is, but I'll still touch upon it in this video just so you know what I'm talking about. The DNA principle is just the steps that you usually follow if you're declaring or if you're making any variable or functions or methods or class in programming. And the DNA principle is basically this. D stands for declare, N stands for name, and A stands for assign. So you want to declare the variable and then give it a name and then assign whatever you want to assign into the be it a variable, a function, a class, whatever it is. You usually follow this 3 principles. So let's get started by declaring a method. So just like we did with variables, you can declare a method by giving it a name like integer, double, float, decimals, all of that stuff. So we're going to start with something simple. We're actually going to make a method that allows us to get a customer that shops at Tesco. So every time we run that method, it should print out the details of a customer that shops at Tesco. So let's do that. So the first step would be to declare the method. So we do this by saying string. Since we're making a method for a string method, we'll say string and then we give it a name. And since we're making a method for customer, we'd say Tesco customer, and that's naming done. And then now we have to assign it. Now this is where it gets a bit tricky, but I need you to follow along and just understand that every time you're making a method, you have to put a bracket, so open and a close bracket after the name of the customer, just the way you've seen it on the screen. After the name of the customer, you have to put open and a close bracket, and then afterwards you now have to do a curly bracket, open curly and a close curly bracket. Now inside of this curly bracket, that's where the meat of the code is going to go. Inside of this curly bracket here is where the steps and the function and the whole thing, the whole meat of the code is going to go in. Now we're going to have to recall what we did in the previous lesson. We talked about variables. We're going to be using variables now. We're actually going to be practicing variables and putting it to work. We're going to be using those now. So a customer is always going to have a name, right? So what do? We make a variable that holds the customer's name. So the name of the customer is always going to be a string, so because it's letters, and it's a word. It's always going to be a word. It's going to be in letters. So we got store it in a string. So we're going to say string first name, and then we store that as a string and call it James. That's the first name of the customer sorted. And then the customer would usually have a surname, so we do another string for surname, and then we save what surname should we call? We should call him Alex. James Alex. That's two first names, but it doesn't matter. Let's keep going. The customer would have an age. Now the age would be stored. If you remember, I told you last lesson that numbers are usually stored in integers long, but since it's just an age, the age isn't a huge number, so we can store it in int. So we'll store it in int, and we'll give the age of 21, and would also make a variable for how much he spends on a weekly basis. So weekly spend at the shop. We've also stored it in an int because it's going to be numbers and it's not going to be a humongous number, so we just we can store it in int. So weekly spend, let's say he spends about £200 every week, right? Right here, what we've just done is made a function, right, that returns all of these details. Well, that at the moment holds all of these details for one Tesco customer. Now, if you notice, we've got a red underline underneath Tesco customers. We can get rid of that by saying return null, and that should get rid of the red underline. Just say return null for a string, and that should get rid of the red underline. So right now we're going to make it so when we run our code, because we are going to run this code and see our code in action, so we're going to make it when we run our code and we call on this function here, it prints out the name, the surname, the age, and the weekly spend of this customer. So now I'm going to introduce you to something new in this lesson. This is a way that allows us to print our code onto the console. So the console is I'll show you what the console is. When you click on the little play button up here, your code would usually run on this thing that looks like command prompt. This is what the console is. So every time you run your code, it would show up on this console. Right now there's nothing on here. Ignore this long line of text up here. Your code would usually run either underneath or on top. Right now it's saying there's nothing on here, and that's because we actually haven't called our method yet, but we're going to call that in a second. But I just wanted to show you what a console is. This is the console. This is where you're going to be seeing your code. Every time you write and you run it, it will show up on here. So let's get back into the code. Right, so now that you know what the console is, we want to be able to when we run the console, we want to be able to see our code, and the way we do that is by using this keyword called console.write. There's a shortcut for writing that. If you press CW and you press tab twice, it will bring up this keyword. This keyword allows you to print out anything to the console. So I'll show you how this works, right, by doing this. If I do CW and I type inside there, I am a good boy. If I run my code now, I am a good boy gets printed into the console. So console.writeLine is going to be your best friend when it comes to displaying stuff onto the console. So now we're actually getting into running our code and actually getting our code to display onto the console. Console.writeLine is going to be your best friend when you want to display anything onto the console. So let's get back into the code again. Right, we just take that out. Okay, so we've done a variable that holds the first name, the surname, the age, and the weekly spend of our customer. Now we want to be able to print that onto the console every time we run the console. So what we're going to do is Remember I told you that the reason why we've got this green underline underneath the names the variable is because the variables are not being used. But today we're going to be using these variables, so these lines are just going to go off. So we're going to do this by just saying first name, and what that does is it calls this first name variable that we made up here and it puts it in here. So now every time we run the code, console.writeLine is going to display whatever is inside of this variable. It's just going to run and display James. So we have to do that again. For surname, and we have to do that again for age, and we have to do that again for weekly spend. So now if you notice, there's no more green underlines underneath the names of the variables, and that's only because now they're being used. Now they're not just sitting there like, you know, like puppets. They're actually getting used now. They're actually getting used in the code now. So we need to get rid of this underline on top of here, and the way we get rid of that is just by again calling the function, getting it ready to be used. And the way we call functions in C# is literally just typing out the name of the function. So it comes up as a suggested right there. I can just go on there and click on it, and then we put the brackets, and then we end the line with semicolon. Now if you notice, the green line is gone. And now if I go up to the top and press this play button and run my code, it's going to come up with the name James, surname Alex, age 21, weekly spend 200. Now we've just accomplished our first task of being able to write a method in C#. Now we're going to clean this up a bit and make it fancier and easy to understand when we run the console. So right inside of this console.writeLine, we can just use this, you know, the same syntax you use when you're writing, you're assigning a data to a string. You can just use the same thing when you're writing inside of a console.writeLine. You can just say first name, and then you do that, and then obviously because you're trying to add a variable name with a text, you have to use the addition symbol. Use the addition symbol to add a text with a variable name. So I've written first name here, and then I've added a symbol, the plus symbol or the addition symbol, and then I've added obviously the name of the variable. And what this does is prints out first name text before it prints out the actual first name, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go up on there, click on the play button again, so now it says first name and then the actual first name of the customer that goes to Tesco's. So we're going to do something like that for the rest of them, but for the second one we're going to put surname and then surname Alex, and then have age and 21, and then have weekly spend and 200. So let's do that real quickly. Surname, and I do that for age as well, and I do that for weekly spend. Let's see if that works. Yep. So now as you can see, first name James, surname Alex, age 21, weekly spend £200. And that is what a method is, and that's how you write a method. Now I can reuse this as much as I want. So if I press this little button here to expand and minimize my code, so if I minimize it and I call that method as much time as I want, if I call that as much times as I want, it's just going to keep redoing that code. And this is what we call reusability in programming. You want to be able to reuse your code as often as possible without actually having to alter the original code. So if I run this now, I'm going to have, I can run it as much times as I want. I can reuse it as much times as I want, and that would run the first name, the surname, the age, and the weekly spend of one specific Tesco customer, and I can just keep reusing that method as much as I want. Next video, Coming up, we're gonna be talking about classes, and for that video, we're gonna show you. Well, I'm gonna show you how you can put methods in a class and make methods more powerful in a class, because you want to make your code as reusable as possible, and classes help you do so. And if you like this video, if you like the content that I'm pushing out, please subscribe to my channel, drop a like, and comment down below. If it's even if it's a feedback, just comment down below and let me know what you think, and I can use your feedback to work on my future videos, to make them better. But thank you, it's been so much fun. Peace.